That night, the wind howled through the narrow streets, rattling the loose shutters of my old apartment. I was about to lock the door when a faint shadow appeared at the end of the road, growing larger with every step. A man I had never seen before stopped right in front of me. His coat was damp from the drizzle, his eyes sharp and unblinking. "If you value your life, don't go to work tomorrow," he said in a low, urgent voice. My hand froze on the doorknob, the cold from his words cutting deeper than the night air. I tried to speak to ask what he meant, but before I could form a single question, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness like smoke. My heart pounded as I stepped back inside, locking the door twice. I told myself it was ridiculous. Just some stranger playing a cruel joke, but the unease settled in my chest like a stone. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, debating whether to believe him. I almost laughed at my own hesitation, yet something deep inside whispered that I should stay home. I called in sick, telling my boss I had a fever. A few hours later, the television erupted with breaking news. An explosion had torn through my office building, sending plumes of black smoke into the sky. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, injured employees were carried out on stretchers, and reporters spoke of casualties. My phone buzzed nonstop, friends and coworkers asking if I was alive. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped it. If I had ignored that warning, I would have been in that building. I stared at the screen in disbelief, realizing that a stranger had just saved my life. The following day, my apartment felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves knew something I didn't. A sharp knock on the door jolted me, and when I opened it, 2 police officers stood there, their faces a mix of curiosity and suspicion. They asked if I was an employee at the office that had exploded. I nodded, still shaken, and one of them immediately asked why I hadn't been there. My throat went dry, but I told them about the stranger's warning. Their expressions barely shifted, though I noticed the faintest exchange of glances between them, as if silently weighing my sanity. They pressed me for a description, but all I could recall was a tall man in a dark, damp coat, piercing eyes that seemed to look straight through me, and a faint smell of smoke clinging to him. One officer scribbled in his notebook while the other studied me, his gaze sharp, almost accusing. When they finally left, I shut the door and leaned against it, my pulse still racing. Questions crowded my mind. Why had he chosen me? Why not warn everyone? And if he knew about the explosion, was he somehow involved? The uncertainty gnawed at me, leaving me restless. At night, every creak in the building made me jump. I found myself glancing at the window more than the TV, half expecting to see those eyes staring back from the shadows. My phone sat silent on the coffee table, yet I kept checking it, waiting for another call. Another message, anything that might explain why a complete stranger had appeared at my door to save me from death, then vanished without a trace. I didn't realize it yet, but the real danger hadn't passed. It was only just beginning. 3 days later, just as I was beginning to convince myself the whole thing was over, I saw him again. I was walking home from the grocery store when a sudden chill ran down my spine, the kind that makes you look over your shoulder. There he was, standing across the street under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, the same dark coat draped over his tall frame, his eyes locked on me as if he'd been waiting. My pulse quickened, and before I could decide whether to run or shout, he turned and walked away, slipping into the maze of narrow side streets. Something in me refused to let him disappear again. Without thinking, I followed, my footsteps quick and quiet against the cracked pavement. The air grew colder as we wove deeper into unfamiliar alleys, past boarded-up shops and graffiti-stained walls. Finally, he stopped in front of an abandoned warehouse, its rusted doors hanging slightly ajar. He stepped inside without looking back, but his voice echoed from the shadows, low and steady. "If you want the truth, come in." My hands trembled as I pushed the door open. Inside, the air smelled of dust and oil, the dim light casting long shadows across the cracked concrete floor. He faced me now, his expression unreadable. "I used to work for them," he said, his voice heavy with something like regret. "The ones who planted that bomb, but I turned against them." I froze, unsure if I should believe him. He stepped closer, his tone sharp. You're not safe because you know something you don't even realize you know? The weight of his words pressed down on me, and in that moment I understood this stranger wasn't just here to save me. He was here to pull me into something far bigger. My voice cracked as I demanded to know what I could possibly know that was worth killing me over. The stranger's eyes flickered toward the shadows as if he feared they were listening. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small black flash drive and pressed it into my palm. Because you've seen him, he said quietly, the man who ordered the explosion. You just didn't realize who he was? My heart pounded as I stared at the device, its weight feeling far heavier than it should. He explained that hidden inside were documents, names, bank records, plans, evidence tying the bombing to powerful officials and wealthy businessmen. One of them, he claimed, had walked right past me in the office cafeteria a week ago. My stomach turned. I asked why they would go to such lengths to kill me if I didn't even know what I had seen. His answer was chilling, because once you connect the pieces, you could destroy them. The air in the warehouse felt colder, the shadows darker. I realized this was no longer about a random act of kindness. He had made me part of a dangerous game. You have two choices, he said, his voice firm. Run, change your name, and live the rest of your life hiding. Or take this and expose them. My hands shook as I clutched the flash drive, the gravity of his words sinking in. Leaving meant safety, but also silence. Staying meant fighting, but it might cost me everything. The stranger stepped back, his face partly hidden in the dim light. If you decide to act, he said, do it soon. They already know you're alive. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. One way or another, my life would never be the same. That night I sat alone at my kitchen table, the flash drive lying in front of me like a ticking bomb. Every sound outside, car doors slamming, footsteps on the pavement, made me flinch. My mind replayed the stranger's warning over and over, but deep down I knew I had already made my choice. Hiding might buy me time, but it would also mean letting them win. With trembling hands, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Folders filled the screen, each one containing photos, signed documents, and video recordings that left my stomach in knots. The men behind the bombing weren't faceless monsters. They were familiar faces from television, charity events, and City Hall. I worked through the night, copying everything and sending it to journalists I trusted, along with an anonymous statement. By sunrise, the first reports began to surface online. Within hours, every major news outlet was broadcasting the scandal, showing evidence too damning to ignore. I watched as powerful officials were led away in handcuffs, their perfect images shattered. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, but when I answered, there was only silence, then the faint sound of breathing before the call cut off. I knew it was a warning, but I also knew it was too late for them to stop the truth. Days later, the stranger appeared one last time, leaning against a lamppost across the street. He didn't come closer, just gave me a slight nod, a look that said everything. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing like he always did. I never saw him again. Sometimes I still feel eyes on me in the dark, but I'm not afraid anymore. The man who saved my life taught me something I will never forget. Fear only wins when you let it.